The next 2 likes will receive it. No, that's not.
Alright, let's see this thing.
This is a song about Jack Stewart.
Oh yeah! Oh, my name is Jock Stewart. I'm a canny gone man, and a roving fan I have been. So be easy and free when you're drinking with me. I'm a man you don't meet every day. I have acres of land, I have men at command, I have always a shilling to spare. So be easy and free when you're drinking with me. I'm a man you don't meet every day. I'm a piper by trade and a roving young blade, and many's a tune I do play. So be easy and free when you're drinking with me. I'm a man you don't meet every day. So come fill up your glass with brandy or wine, and whatever the cost I will pay. So be easy and free when you're drinking with me. I'm a man you don't meet every day. So be easy and free when you're drinking with me. I'm a man you don't meet every day.
Thank you, good night.
Your great-great-grandfather cleared a little piece of land. Your great-grandfather helped to plow the field by hand. And your grandfather took it, made it grow and made it thrive. And your father sold it off and took a steady 9 to 5. As for you, young man, in the city all alone, in a 1-bedroom loft, winter chills you to the bone. When you dream at night, you feel the shovel in your hand as you walk the fields of that little piece of land. Well, now your great-great-grandmom, she had 14 kids to raise. And then your great-grandmom nearly followed in her ways. Then your grandmother had 3 and decided to prevent. And your mom had just the 1, and she was an accident. As for you, little girl, different partner every night. And if anything goes wrong, you go to town and put it right. But in the silent morning, you can almost hear the sound of a big kitchen table, and all the children gathered round. Your great-great-grandfather's dad was a Depression-era man, and your grandfather's dad counted pennies in the hand. And thank God your granddad became a millionaire, and your dad retired early to live off of his share. As for you, young man, you owe your soul to Uncle Sam. You can't even get a loan, and nobody gives a damn. So to fight the temptation to commit armed robbery, you keep reading books about how to embrace a life of simplicity. Your great-great-grandmom and dad, they knew how to throw it down. Then your great-grandmom and dad, they went a-swinging through this town. And your grandmom and dad, they sang twist and shout all night. Mom and dad met at a disco. Did you know it was love at first sight? As for you, my friend, how do your evenings go? Can you break away from the television glow? Some things never change under any circumstance. Put your new shoes on, kid, 'cause we're going out to dance.
Hello, my friends. How are you all doing tonight? Tonight I'm going to be, the main topic of discussion is going to be astrology. I'm going to warm up with a couple other sort of minor topics beforehand, but I've been wanting to talk about astrology for a while because I consider it a bunch of nonsense. And I'm slightly alarmed at the number of the small handful, really, that I've seen, but the number of popular right-wing influencers, talking heads on the dissident right spheres online. Some big names that you probably have heard of are, we'll be talking about the Golden One. Another big one that I saw recently was on Twitter, Solbra. And of course, one of the recognized experts in the field, Philosophicat, who had a discussion with the Golden One on the topic, just to name a few. So I want to talk about it because, of course, I feel like it's a coincidence. I don't think that anybody is addressing me, but after I came out with my Substack article talking about ancient occultism being sort of a cloak for real-world rational intelligence gathering, astrology being one of those occult disciplines that I think has been used to historically conceal the genuine means by which ancient intelligence gatherers gathered their information. After I made that article, I saw a couple of these people pop up in support of a credulous belief in astrology, and so I wanted to nail down the topic and give you all of my thoughts, or at least the thoughts that I can communicate in a single live stream, because it is a big topic. It's a sprawling topic, and there's a lot of ways to approach it. And I haven't done as much rehearsing or preparation as I usually would like to do for a stream. So I'm going to try to lay out my arguments in as cohesive a manner as I can. But you know, I might ramble a bit at times, so bear with me. But before we get to that, one little thing just to sort of warm up, like I said, that I've been interested in lately is suburban planning. Not the most rousing topic, I know, but my wife and I, have been planning a move up to Quebec. And in Quebec, the suburbs look a lot different from the suburbs around Chicago, where I'm from. And as I started to dig into the question of why Chicago suburbs look the way they do, there's a whole very interesting history behind the philosophical rationale of suburban planning. And I just find it to be an interesting topic. So as I go on, you guys let me know, if this is boring, I'll switch gears. But one of the main fellows, well, let me just say, so what are the differences between Chicago suburbs and Quebec suburbs? One of the main differences that we've talked about, one of the main things that my wife, who's from Quebec, noticed, is that in Chicago, we have very generously portioned road verges. And even on the Wikipedia page for the road verge, they show a picture of Oak Park, Illinois, which is a neighboring town to where I live. She says in Quebec, they don't have this strip, this greenway between the sidewalk and the road that has big tall trees and a grassy area. They don't really have that in Quebec. Most of the time in Quebec, the sidewalk comes pretty much right up to the road. And I found it interesting that this was a big difference, because to me this was just normal. This was just the standard, to have your lawn here, the sidewalk, and then a nice big strip of green grass separating the sidewalk from the street with big trees growing in it. That to me I thought was interesting that they didn't have that. And so I started looking into this question of why Chicago is arranged in this way. And that took me, I'm looking a couple things up here, that took me into the interesting history of landscape architecture and design and suburban planning. And one of the main fellows here, and I think honestly this setup for a suburban street is very German. I might be going out on a limb there saying this, but I think it's a very Germanic or Nordic aesthetic, and a lot of it comes back to this fellow called Friedrich Law Olmsted, who was a Saxon. Olmsted, he's an Englishman, but I think he had mostly Germanic, Saxon ancestry to him. And he laid the foundations for a lot of what we in America consider to be beautiful landscape architecture. He designed New York's Central Park, just a whole big list of places that he designed. And one of the first ever Chicago suburbs that was created was a place called Riverside, Illinois, which is also a neighboring town to where I live. And Riverside, Illinois I think was the sort of it was the trailblazer. It was the gold standard, the model that a lot of the other suburbs around Chicago followed, and Olmsted designed Riverside, and it's a beautiful little town. If you look, even if you just look at the satellite view here, you can see all the surrounding area, gray, concrete, and then right here, this little tucked away suburb, Riverside, is mostly green, and you could see the roads too, compared to everything around it, block grid. Riverside was designed with these curving, meandering paths for their roads, and Olmsted's whole philosophy of landscape architecture can be summarized, I think, I'm going to butcher the quote, but he said something like, when it comes to designing landscape architecture, number one is nature, number two is nature, number three is nature, and then following that is architecture and human needs and human practical interests. And I found that to be fascinating. There's one of the big things to me that was interesting about this was when I started looking into the history of this suburb. I found a marketing advertising pamphlet from 1871 when the village was just being finished, and it's incredible to me to see the difference between then and today, of how they would market a housing development, essentially. The vocabulary that they used was leaps and bounds above what we have today. The details that they would give, the technical details that they would provide, are so specific and so wholesome and holistic that when you read this, you can see that this company that was advertising the housing of this suburb was extremely advanced compared to what we have today. Their interests were way more broad, way more high-minded, and to see the difference between then and now is kind of striking to me. That I really feel like there was a higher caliber of people living back then. And before I continue on, gosh, I never checked if my sound is good. How is my sound, fellas? Cultural Hegelianism, good to see you. Zeddez asks, haven't we touched upon this topic multiple times? Maybe others have. I don't think I've gotten into this specifically. Anyway, thanks for confirming the sound is good, fellas. So here, I'll just read a couple sections from this because it really feels like this was a higher caliber of people back then. And this was one of the first suburbs created outside of Chicago. So that's why I think, when this was created, other suburbs around the area tried to take as much as they could from this design and incorporate it into their designs of their urban plans. So these people had the main things that I think that these people had compared to what we have today is they believed in permanence and beauty. Those are the two words that come to mind for me. Permanence and beauty. They wanted, and beauty of nature, I should specify. They wanted their town to be constructed in such a way that the infrastructure would be permanent. They were looking generations into the future to think, how is this place going to look 40, 50, 60 years in the future, minimum? The second thing is they wanted the beauty of nature. They wanted to be living in an area that was in harmony as much as it could be with nature. And so I'll read a couple lines here. No modern city has long enjoyed much commercial prosperity without causing some beautiful rural neighborhoods to grow up near it, in which a large number of its most wealthy citizens and energetic businessmen reside during a part, if not the whole, of the year. Chicago seems to have been an apparent exception to this rule. This was in 1871. Until the creation of Riverside, which presents such advantages of location, climate, soil, and improvement that have not only established for it a special reputation, but give unqualified assurance of permanence to its character as a superior residence locality. It entered into the minds of the originators of Riverside to do that in the beginning, which the inhabitants of village or town or city sometimes do, and always want to do, after the place is full of people, and when to do so costs 10 times as much as it ought. The Riverside Improvement Company was organized in April 1869 under a special charter granted by the state of Illinois to carry the above idea into effect. In other words, prepare a city and depend upon people to live in it when it was completed. So its first step, blah, 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 obtain the land. The locality is by far the best near Chicago for this purpose, being of inviting surface and suitable soil, and adapted to perfect drainage by its elevation above the river, and with a large portion covered by groves of thrifty and beautiful trees. So improve it with conveniences of the city, gas, water, roadways, walks, drainage, with all the beauties of landscape, gardening, and the essential advantages of the country, and by doing so make it the most pleasant, healthful, and desirable place of residence attainable anywhere. So these people had this grand notion of what they were doing. They wanted to make the most pleasant, most healthy, most desirable, most beautiful of landscape architecture that could be attained anywhere. They stress this over and over. They say, you take somebody to a park in Riverside, and that person could be from London, they could be from Paris, they could be from New York, and walking through these parks, despite being from these world-class metropolitan cities, they will be impressed by the beauty of the natural beauty of this area. And it really is a beautiful town. And some of the interesting little tidbits, I'll move on because I've said enough, but some of the interesting little tidbits are things like they had these, they weren't just commercially driven. They required that anybody who buys property in the area had to build a house and live there. There's no speculators allowed. So the problem that we have today in America often with the housing market are like foreign speculators that come in and just buy up land. Chinese people or Chinese companies or Arab companies or whatever come in and buy up land, or these giant corporations like BlackRock or whatever name the big corporation. They're all out there. They came in and they buy property and use it as a speculation tool to make money. The people who owned Riverside completely forbid that from happening. The only people who could buy property here were people who were going to actually live there and construct a home within a year. They also required that your home allow for a certain distance between the house and the street. So you had to have a nice easement, a nice road verge, as it was just called, what we were just looking at. You had to have a certain number of trees on your property. It was required that you planted trees. And it said the entire area, they really stressed the beauty of the trees in the area. Fine growth forest of oak, elm, ash, linden, hickory, black walnut, hazels, etc. And it also stresses things like the soil is good for growing trees, shrubs, flowers, small fruits, ample space for a barn, far enough away from your house that you won't smell it. So I just find that interesting, the difference in mentality between then and today, where housing today is, for all intents and purposes, just considered a speculative investment, whereas then, when these settlements were being created, the owners felt like they had to appeal to a sense of permanence, beauty, and world-class design work, and that kind of mentality really doesn't exist today. So that's one interesting thing. Let me check back in with the chat. Jolly Croc says, no one bring up the Chicago World's Fair, please. Yeah, Olmsted apparently designed the Chicago World's Fair. That was one of the things that he designed, I believe. Yeah, the Columbian World Expo. But we won't go down that rabbit hole. Yeah, Olmsted is a fascinating fellow. You guys, if you don't know him, he's really interesting. And I just love it. It feels like people back then were of such a higher caliber compared to today. You don't have people like this today who, he also, I think, was a part of the Free Niagara movement. Yeah, the Niagara Falls. Back in this time period, Niagara Falls was basically cluttered with ugly businesses and industry, the manufactories and things of that nature, and it polluted the landscape. And this guy helped to create a movement to drum up grassroots support for preserving places of natural beauty. And if it weren't for people like him, I think a lot of places that we take for granted today as being naturally beautiful wouldn't have been preserved. And that kind of, not only is it great that people like him existed and had the power and ability to design landscape architecture the way that he did and to actually implement it, but also the fact that these kinds of arguments and this kind of high-minded idealism appealed to the average person back then. Whereas today, like I said, the idea of property being situated in an area that is in harmony with nature doesn't really cross people's minds. I mean, I looked up a couple of brochures for planned communities that are being built today, and a lot of them sort of pay lip service to the idea of natural beauty, but the main interests that people have are like, how good is my internet going to be? How modern are my appliances going to be? How modern and chic is the architecture and the designs of the houses? How many amenities am I going to have access to at the community the community hall or whatever. So it was just a different type of person living back then. But let me just jump to the next topic real quick. I'm very loquacious. I can just drone on and on. But here, the next one this will be quicker. I don't know if any of you watch a channel called Matt's Off-Road Recovery. This is Matt right here. Since I'm a tow truck driver, I found Matt's Off-Road Recovery a couple years ago and started watching his videos because of most of what he does is he posts videos of himself recovering vehicles that are stuck in the wilderness of Utah. He's out in Utah. So there's, I love things like this one, really hard recoveries, this one. And it's just a really interesting channel to me, not just because I'm a tow truck driver, but because Matt and his whole crew are really likable people. And my experience of the towing industry in Chicago is that it's full of sort of not the most professional, not the nicest people. There's a song called the Lincoln Park Pirates. It's about a towing company in Chicago that goes around and basically illegally tows people's cars and then holds them hostage until people pay exorbitant prices. And that's kind of the reputation that the industry has around here. There's a whole term called chasers. And these are people who go around looking for accidents, and then when they find somebody who's been in an accident, they basically say, like, they intimidate them into letting them tow the car. They lie and say things like, oh, we have to tow your car, or the police are going to fine you, or this or that. And so they get them to sign a piece of paper, tow the car away, and it turns out that piece of paper you signed is the agreement to pay a ridiculous sum to have your car towed. So really the industry around Chicago has a really not the greatest reputation. But it's great to see someone like Matt, who is always professional, always respectful, always has a great work ethic, and is a really a consummate professional, where he doesn't just tow cars, he's building his own wrecker. They do their own welds, they do their own modifications to their rigs, they network with other people involved in the industry. They do all kinds of things that a really great professional does, and I feel like he elevates what is basically a blue collar profession into something that is really kind of respectable, and something that is highly skilled. And recently he organized this whole thing called the Off-Road Wrecker Games.
Right.
And when you look at the audience, I made a tweet about this, saying like this is one of the last stands of implicit American whiteness, because you look at the audience and they're all white. And I can't get into all the things here, but if you watch this, there's so many things that to me are like, this is fundamentally like wholesome blue collar white culture. And it's great to see something like this going on, where a crowd of people that the average person might consider to be like low life, or whatever name you want to give it, they're there, and everything that they're doing is wholesome. There's no there's none of the negative stereotypes that you would think about, like rural redneck whites. There's nothing. Everything is family friendly. Everything is in service of, or in promotion of, high standards of skill and professionalism in their craft. there's a lot of camaraderie and joking, and it's all wholesome, it's all good, and I consider this like a great example of a bastion of good, wholesome, blue-collar, white American culture. So check him out. And this guy is a guy that, if only, I feel like he's almost too nice and too personable to ever come out and take a radical political stance, which is unfortunate, because if a guy like him came out and explicitly declared himself to be pro-white or anti-globo-homo, whatever word you want to give the universalist liberal ideology today, if he came out against it, this guy could be a good grassroots leader for this giant crowd of people that came out to see him work. Let me find an aerial view to show you how big this event was. See, all these people came out because of this one guy organizing basically blue-collar towing Olympics. And, that type of person would be the type of person that could instantly rally an entire community and make a huge difference. So my point is, if you're young and you're looking for some kind of line of work, you don't know what you're going to do with your life or whatever. Even something as simple as towing cars. If you elevate your profession to the highest possible caliber, and you learn all the ins and outs of everything that's involved in your trade, and you network with your community, and you show that you're an upstanding, virtuous person, this is the type of impact you can have. This is just one towman being at the top of his game, and this is the impact that he can have. Imagine if he was explicitly pro-white. The impact he could have on his community is insane. So you could be that person. That's what I'm saying with this. So we go back to the Spirit Solace says, I see a lot of obesity. Well, that's everywhere in America, unfortunately. There's also a lot of not obesity, so they're all out doing physical activities in nature. It's wholesome. I don't see any reason to counter-signal this. Anyway, I'm going to take a 2-minute break, get something to wet my whistle, and then we're going to get on to the main subject of the stream, which is astrology. I might have to go back later and clip this out because this is a much longer intro than I was expecting, but I'm going to play you a quick song, and I will be right back to discuss the main topic.
The lass that I loved first of all was handsome, young and fair. Where I spent sae money a nicht down by the bank, so where I spent sae money a nicht where scented clover grows and the echo mocks the corn creek among yon queeny elves. We loved each other dearly and disputes we seldom had. As constant as the pendulum, our hearts beat ever glad. we sought for joy and found it where yon we burnie rouse, and the echo mocks the corn creek among yon queeny now. Ye ladies fair and pleasure, dames drive tae the banks o' Doon. Ye dearly pay your every cent to barbers for perfume, but rural joys are free for all where scented clover grows, and the echo mocks the corn creek among yon queeny knowes. The corn creek is new, on the bank is tae the brim. The queeny knowes are capped with snow to top the highest whim, but when cold winter is awa and summers pierce the sky, we'll welcome back the corn creek, the bird of rural joy.
Okay, on to the controversy. Astrology. Now, I tried to create a little bit of an outline that I'm going to follow here. And I don't know if you guys saw it, but I did a poll. Here it is. I did a Twitter poll asking you guys what you thought of astrology, and most people thought it was fake/deceptive, which I was happy to see. But a good portion believes that it is legitimate. And like I said at the beginning, there are a handful of influencers in the dissident right sphere who promote astrology. One, I'm going to start with a video from one big name, the Golden One, and we're going to look at his argument just to set the stage. We're going to look at his argument for why he believes in astrology now.
You might have surmised from the title of the video, astrology is actually legit. Now I want to apologize, actually, because I have many years ago, before I became the enlightened one. Now I'm merely jesting. I'm still only a humble poet, a seeker of truth. Anyway, many years ago in a video I said that astrology was bro science or pseudoscience. For that I'm sorry.
So my first question is, what changed? Before he understood that astrology was pseudoscience, what changed? Does his entire understanding of reality and how things work in nature, did that change? And why? Let's continue.
Mea culpa, my fault. I retract my blasphemous words. So
No, he calls it blasphemous. This is always the type of rhetoric that that promoters of astrology use. They really like hype up the emotionality of the issue.
anyway, this will be familiar to anyone who is an enjoyer of the greatest pod.
Chadson. Yeah, I do have a Telegram, but I don't use it really as much as I used to. Haven't used it really in months.
I have talked about my first revelation as it pertains to astrology, or rather how the moon and the moon phases, how they affect us humans or animals or the planet as a whole. So the story is, a few years back I deadlift.
Now we know the moon affects the Earth gravitationally. It's a big rock orbiting the planet, and the gravity of the moon causes the tides and things of that nature. That's all rational. But he's not talking about gravity here. He's talking about something else.
Lifted a lot, as you will have seen in my many training videos, and since I live a quite disciplined life that my routines are basically always the same, I can pinpoint different factors. If I feel a bit stronger during a day, or if I feel weaker a day, I can usually pinpoint what is the difference. So a few sessions over a period of half a year, something like that, I know.
Katie says it's hard to watch what the gray one says. Well, we're not going to watch too much longer, don't worry.
Just that I was significantly stronger, or noticeably stronger during certain days, and they happened to be on.
Witness says gravity is a theory. Well, it's not even a theory in terms of the modern scientific view of gravity. It's not even a theory, it's simply a description. The question of what actually mediates, what causes the pull of all atoms to all other atoms is not explained by modern mathematical physics. And I would recommend looking into somebody called Bill Gates, because I think he's one of the only people out there who has a clear, unambiguous, rational theory for what causes this pull between objects at a distance, but that's a different topic.
Full moon. Then I talked to some other high Thumos guys, and they had noticed the same pattern.
Okay, let me back up here because I've been interrupting, and this is his big revelation.
Certain days, and they happened to be on full moon. Then I talked to some other high Thumos guys, and they had noticed the same pattern. So that was the very first astrology red pill for me.
So he says his first astrology red pill, his big revelation for the legitimacy of astrology, is that he noticed he kind of felt a little stronger around full moons. Now, a full moon is simply a phase of the lunar cycle where at night the sun is shining and the light of the sun bounces from the moon, from the full moon's face to the earth. It's not like the moon is any farther, it's not like it's any closer. It's just a matter of positioning between the earth, the moon, and the sun, and the way that the light is reflecting. So the question, why would that make any difference in how strong you feel? And second of all, are we to believe that everybody feels stronger on a full moon? This is the problem with astrology in general. Well, one of the problems, we'll get into a lot of the problems, but this is one of the problems, is that a lot of it is this after the fact interpretation of events, and it's a very selective, very cherry-picking type of interpretation. Are we to believe that we can't find a single person who felt a little weaker on that day? Are we to believe that every full moon you're stronger? And why would we even believe something that is essentially unquantifiable? How do we know you actually felt stronger? And what happens if you don't feel stronger? There's so many vagaries, so many ambiguities, so many inconsistencies to a statement like this that to unpack it would take too much time. So I think if you're following along and you're a rational thinker, you can see how many problems are inherent in this one suggestion. It kind of baffles me that he would take this seriously. And I believe that there's a reason that he's taking this seriously. I think that people who believe in astrology are kind of an audience that he wants to target. And I believe that there are... Let's move on to some of the things that... Because this ties in with why people like him, why dissident right influencers like him are promoting astrology. Some of the arguments that they often use are rooted in these sorts of things, like that all the ancients believed in astrology, that it's an appeal to tradition. And we know that our audience, the people who follow in these circles, are often respectful of or want to honor our ancient ancestors and our traditions. So one of the biggest sort of emotional appeals that are made is this idea that all the ancients believed in it and that it's part of tradition, capital T tradition. Well, it turns out not all ancients believed in this. And even if they did, it's not a conclusive argument for it being true. We have to be able to assess and analyze things for ourselves. I feel like these kinds of arguments are emperor's new clothes type arguments, where the person who makes it will say, oh, well, all of the ancients believed in it and it's part of tradition. And that it's basically daring you. It's daring you to say, no, I don't believe in it. Because the dare is, if you say you don't believe in it, then, oh, well, you must not respect our ancestors. You must not believe in tradition. So if you want to believe in tradition, if you want to respect our ancestors, you better shut your mind off and go along with this idea. But like I said, it's not every ancient believed in this, and we have to be able to understand things for ourselves. And this whole "it works for me" thing too is another aspect of what the Golden One just said. I feel like I was stronger on the full moons. I have basically a pareidolia effect of looking back on it. Yeah, I did feel stronger that day, and oh, it was a full moon. Therefore, the moon must have had something to do with me feeling stronger. I mean, anybody who has a faculty of rational analysis and rational thinking should be able to understand why this is not a good argument, why this is not evidence. So that's a big enough bite to chew on right now. Let's get into, I wanted to talk about one of the ancients who didn't believe in astrology. His name was Sextus Empiricus. Okay. We'll read the abstract here. Make this bigger. The book Against the Professors, written by the Greek physician and philosopher Sextus Empiricus around 200 AD, gives many arguments against astrology. As above, so below, sympathy does not exist. Astrology cannot exist unless all things are destined. Forecasting sure events is useless because they cannot be avoided, and forecasting unsure events is useless because they can be avoided. Why birth and not conception? For your star sign, why is it that the birth is what gives you your star sign rather than the moment you were conceived? Birth time is uncertain. Birth is a long process. Birth time cannot be accurately known by the observer of the sky, who might be on a mountain peak. The sky cannot be observed in daytime or on cloudy nights. Many people are born at every instant, but none was equal to Plato or Alexander the Great. Many people have different births, nevertheless meeting the same end. That's also something that I want to talk a little bit more about later. If there are thousands of people born every minute. Thousands of people born every single minute on this earth. Are we to believe that every minute a new batch of identical people with extremely similar life trajectories, personalities, fates are born just because they're born on the same minute? Astrological analogies, Leos are brave like lions, are absurd. Astronomy is meaningless unless the same planetary positions produce the same result. Many of these arguments are still in use today. Interestingly, they cannot be dismissed as the ravings of a practitioner of scientism, reductionism, materialism, or neo-positivism, because Sextus was none of these. Instead, he practiced an early form of skepticism, blah, blah, blah. So, let me just find where exactly I want to start reading again. So this is where he talks about birth time being indeterminate back then. That was more relevant than today. But that is something that I've heard people like Philosophicat say, is like, you have to know the hour of your birth, because the exact hour will change your star signs and this and that. Well, astrology's been around forever, and people back then were completely unable to determine the exact hour of their birth often. Maybe the sky was cloudy, they were born at night. There's a lot of things that would have inhibited people from knowing the exact hour of their birth, and yet astrologers back then thought that they could give accurate horoscopes and predictions. So that is a strike against them. Here's one. When people are born at different times, it does not imply that they will be absolutely different, he says. For if those who have the same disposition at birth meet with the same results during life, then certainly those whose births are different become different. This is one of the tenets of astrology. But this is false, for we see many who differ as to age and bodily shape and countless other peculiar affections, yet meeting with a similar end. On different people that have a similar fate, Sextus gives the following examples. For the men who are born in the arrow's point of the archer is doomed. For the man who was born in the arrow's point of the archer is doomed, according to astrological theory, to be slain. How is it that all those myriads of barbarians who fought against the Greeks at Marathon were slain at one time? For the horoscope was not the same for all of them. And again, if he who was born in the pitcher of Aquarius is doomed to suffer shipwreck, how is it that the Greeks, who were being brought back from Troy, were all drowned together round the hollows of Euboea? For that all these men, who differed greatly from another, could have been born in the pitcher of Aquarius is impossible. Okay, so this is interesting also, because back then it seems like certain signs had very definite associations to them, like being born in the arrow's point of the archer, or being born in the pitcher of Aquarius. Okay, these had specific fates attached or associated with them. Today it's a lot different, and we'll get into this. I have an example a modern horoscope from this guy, Chris Brennan. Today it's much different. They've become way more sophisticated with being vague and ambiguous. But back then, there were very specific fates attached to certain star signs. And a lot of people suffered the same fate without having the same star sign. A lot of people with the same star sign don't suffer the same fate. How is that logically possible if these stars are supposed to determine the fate of our lives? He even compares the lives of a man and an animal born simultaneously. And some other person will raise the doubt regarding the irrational animals. For if the effects in life naturally result from the configurations of the stars, then when a pack ass and a man are both born in the same portion of the sign, the same kind of life ought to be followed as a result in both cases. Instead of the man being, for example, conspicuous as a statesman and admired by the citizens, while the pack ass is continually laden with burdens or led away to the mill houses. Okay. So he says, Sextus concludes from these arguments that it is not reasonable or logically understandable that life is ordered according to the motions of the stars. But this is not the end of his argumentation. Already in the first centuries of our era, astrologers associated shapes and characters of men with the figures of the signs. This practice is attacked by Sextus. So here. For, in the first place, if they assert that the man born in Leo is brave because the lion is a valiant and manly beast, how is it that they reckon the bull, which is on a par with the lion, to be a womanish beast? And secondly, it is nonsense to suppose that the lion in the heavens, that most beautiful sign, bears any analogy to the earthly lion. For it is probable that the ancients gave them names of this sort merely because of the similarity of their figures, perhaps not even for this reason, but just for the sake of clearness and exposition. The following argument refutes some properties that were associated with the sign Virgo. And again, if he who has the Virgin for horoscope, i.e. ascending, is straight-haired, bright-eyed, and white-skinned, it must follow that none of the Ethiopians has the Virgin for horoscope, else they will be granting that an Ethiopian is white, bright-eyed, and straight-haired, which, of all things, is the most absurd. So apparently the sign of Virgo, if you're born with the Virgin horoscope, you would be straight-haired, bright-eyed, and white-skinned. But that doesn't apply to Ethiopians, obviously. There are so many innumerable inconsistencies, contradictions, logical problems with astrology when it is presented in an unambiguous way. Finally, the final argument I will show here is fascinating because of Sextus's request for reproducibility as evidence. I affirm that if the prediction is to be reliable, the same position of the stars ought not be observed once, only in connection with the life of some one person, but a second time with a second life, and a third one with a third, so that from the equality of the resultant effects in all cases, we might learn that when the stars have assumed a certain configuration, the result will be certainly of one particular kind. Okay? And this is definitely, what I was talking about earlier with ex post facto interpretations of events. People will they'll notice a coincidence of, I felt stronger when it was a full moon. Therefore, the full moon made me stronger. Or, a baby was born with the Virgo horoscope and had straight hair, bright eyes, and white skin. Therefore, the Virgin horoscope causes these qualities. And like Sextus, I would agree that if there is this actual connection, if there is a causal relationship between the configurations of the stars and human personality traits, human physical qualities, human life trajectories and fates, then that should be consistent. But instead, what modern astrologers have done is create ambiguous and vague horoscopes where, and this is what we're about to see, I'm going to show you this example. They create ambiguous and vague horoscopes that say yes and no at the same time. They say you'll be this way, but if you're not that way, then you'll be this way. And they give two broad or three or even four broad options so that at least one of these options will fit you. And from that, you'll say, oh, wow, it was so accurate. Let's look at an example here. See what people are saying in the comments here. Spirit Splice says all astrology is local. Why? And local to what? What causes it to be local, and how local is local? These are all arbitrary determinations that are used by supporters of astrology to wiggle out of disambiguity, of clearness and rationality in their descriptions and predictions. Ariel says modern horoscopes is irrelevant to the birth chart. Well, Sextus was writing in the 2nd century AD, far closer to the classical era of Greek astrology that people say, oh, that was the legit astrology. And yet this legit astrology that Sextus was critiquing is even more on its face wrong than modern astrology, because like I said, the modern astrologers are much better at creating these ambiguities that people can, after the fact, reinterpret to create the illusion of a pattern. GG user asks, Germ, thoughts on my last comment? Let me see. Oh, was it a comment on a video? Because I'm not seeing any other comment. Anyway, let's watch here an example of a horoscope, and I'll tell you exactly how it is doing this, where it creates ambiguities, creates contradictions, and you get to pick and choose the vagary that fits you. And this is a long video, we're not going to watch all of it, but
all right. Hey, my name is Chris Brennan, and this is your year-ahead horoscope forecast for the sign of...
This guy is considered like the authority by Philosophicat, and since Philosophicat is kind of like becoming an influential figure among the dissident right, you can trace back to this guy for these ideas. So he's not just
Aries,
some random guy.
For the entire year ahead of 2023. So I'm doing this as a live stream today as a bit of an experiment, so let's see how it goes. So my horoscopes are meant to be read from your rising sign primarily if you have Aries rising, although you can also look at them from the perspective of your sun sign if your sun is in Aries, especially if you were born during the day, or your moon sign, especially if you were born during the night. So let's go ahead and jump right into it then, Aries. So here's a planetary movements calendar that shows where the planets will start at the beginning of the year and where they'll end up by the end of the year. And here's a list of the primary transits that I want to talk about for your astrological forecast for the entire year of 2023. So the first one I want to start with is Mars. Is finishing its long retrograde period in Gemini in your 3rd house of siblings, communication, neighbors, and short distance travel during the course of the first 3 months of 2023. So most of this transit already took place in the later part of 2022, where we just passed the middle point actually very recently. But Mars isn't actually going to station direct until January 12th, and it's not going to leave the sign of Gemini that it's transiting in your chart until later in March. So Mars transits typically can indicate periods of conflict or difficulties or setbacks or sometimes even discord in the area of life that they transit.
Okay, so here's the first thing that I want to mention is conflict, discord. Who doesn't have at least some of that in their life at some point in time? Every single day you could come up with an example of something that was a slight conflict or a slight discord or a slight setback. It happens all the time to everybody.
Backs or
so when you get a horoscope like this, it puts that idea in your head, and when you encounter one of these inevitable conflicts or setbacks or whatever that happens to everybody all the time, then you associate it with the horoscope and you think, wow, that was accurate.
Sometimes even discord in the area of life that they transit. So for you, this could involve like getting in a fight or a falling out with siblings or neighbors. It can indicate being more prone to having combative communication or verbal arguments, since it's your third house. It can also indicate some difficulties or interruptions in a short distance trip, like having issues with like a car or getting into some sort of accident or something like that. So it doesn't always have to be the worst case scenario, but the main piece of advice for the first 3 months of the year is just to be extra cautious and careful, because sometimes Mars transits can make us a little bit impulsive. And when we do things or say things impulsively, sometimes we can get ourselves into trouble by acting first before we think, or getting into a period of being more hot-headed than normal, and that can sometimes put us in difficult or even dangerous situations. So that's one of the first transits that I wanted to mention in the very first part of the year that lasts until March 25th. The next transit that's really notable is that Saturn is finally going to depart from the sign of Aquarius. It's moving out of a long 3-year transit through your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances, which could have indicated a period of contraction and running into surmountable difficulties with friends and groups, or having to restructure your social life in some way, with Saturn transiting through your third house since about March of 2020, give or take. And now Saturn's going to be moving into your 12th house, and the 12th house has to do traditionally in ancient astrology with themes of enemies, sometimes health issues such as either physical health issues like long-term health issues, or sometimes dealing with mental health things. And other times it can just have to do with themes having to do with seclusion, or finding yourself needing to embrace themes of solitude.
So do you notice these 3 things that he's brought up? He's brought up conflicts with friends, health issues, or seclusion or solitude. These like broad strokes will apply to almost everybody in one sense or another. In one sense or another, you're going to find yourself either having like a small conflict or disagreement with friends, or you're going to have some little health issue or something going on, or you're going to find yourself in solitude or secluded. It's just, it goes from one thing to another. It's, it could mean this broad thing, or it could mean this broad thing, or it could mean this broad thing. And it just shotguns a number of broad things that are going to apply to the majority of the population, and basically catch as many people as they possibly can with this net.
So Saturn transits can be a period of contraction and sometimes can indicate surmountable difficulties. So sometimes there can be an issue that arises in this area that forces you to deal with it, but it's one of those cliche sort of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger type.
See, who doesn't come into some kind of conflict of like a surmountable difficulty? It happens to everybody all the time.
scenarios rather than something that just gets completely in your way and knocks you off course. So one of the things I like to talk about when it comes to the 12th house is enemies. And by enemies, I mean sometimes that just simply means people you don't get along with in your life. And with Saturn transits, it's always going to have to do with needing to think about how to address those people and fix those structures in your life without tearing everything down. So what do you do when you run into a disagreement with somebody, or what do you do when you run up against something in your life where, you know, this person just is out for you for some reason, and you need to figure out a calm and sort of like collected way to deal with that without getting overly depressed or walking away from the situation or what have you. So that's going to be one of your themes that's going to come up over the course of the next 3 years, because Saturn's going to be transiting through.
And over the next 3 years, who is not going to come into one of these problems over the course of 3 years of their life?
That sector of your chart until early 2026. This is also a good time to pay attention to health issues as well as long-term mental things in order to just make sure you're doing the best job taking care of yourself, and that you're doing good diet and exercise and even mental health regimes in order to make sure you're not letting things go and letting things get to the point where you have some sort of issue come up just because you're not doing what you sort of already know that you're supposed to be doing. So if there's any way that you can be more proactive about dealing with physical and mental health over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, I think that would be constructive, because then you'll come out the other side of this transit in much better shape than you did going into it, because you've kind of confronted and dealt with some of the issues that maybe you'd let go for a period of time. Additionally, with Saturn going through your 12th house, you may just find yourself a little bit less social, especially with Saturn departing from your 11th and the emphasis going from the 11th to the 12th.
See, everybody goes through cycles of wanting to be social and wanting to kind of go back into themselves. It happens to everybody all the time. So it's like these vague, broad brushstrokes.
But sometimes that can be okay to sort of embrace some of those feelings of isolation or solitude in some instances, and find some deeper level of happiness or fulfillment even doing that, just going solo or going it alone sometimes.
See, okay.
All right, so that transit
We'll do one more little section here, and then I'm done with Chris.
really begins in March, and it's going to be on for the next 3 years, off and on. It'll be more or less intense at different points depending on how it's hitting your birth chart. The other transit I wanted to mention, so I talked about Saturn departing from your 11th house of friends and groups, but interestingly, what happens right around the same time is that on March 23rd, the planet Pluto dips into Aquarius for the very first time for a few months, and just gives you a little bit of a preview this year of what that very long-term 20-year transit of Pluto through Aquarius and through your 11th house of friends and groups and alliances is going to be like. So with Pluto going through the 11th, Pluto has to do with themes of intensity and taking small things and making them bigger. It also can sometimes have to do with themes of control and power and sometimes even manipulation. And for you, with that going through your 11th house, this is primarily going to focus on themes related to friends and groups and alliances, as well as potentially broader themes having to do with organizations or social movements. So you may find yourself in a greater position of power over the course of this transit, where suddenly you're in a position of authority and you have to decide what to do with that power, and if put in that position, if you can wield power in a way that's ethical and good, or alternatively, if you can run into issues with that and sometimes receive pushback because you don't wield that power in a very ethical way. It's going to be largely up to you, but that may be part of a long-term learning process for you, because this transit, while it only lasts for a few months this year, that's just the initial preview, the initial dip of Pluto into Aquarius, and then it's going to go back into your 10th house of career for most of the rest of the year. It's going to be a transit that you want to pay attention to, just because it's going to last for so long, into, I believe, the early 2040s.
Into the early 2040s. So we have like a over a 10-year, at this point, like a 17-year span of time, where at some point you're going to find yourself in a position of authority, and you're either going to wield it in a responsible way, an ethical way, or you're not, and then you're going to learn from that. It's like these things happen to everybody. These things happen to everybody, no matter who you are. Even if you're a lowly person working at some corporation or whatever, there's going to be moments when you find yourself put into a position where you have to make a decision, or a position where you're in power for some reason. It happens to everybody. And the outcome is like applying to everybody. Either you're going to do it well, or you're not going to do it well, and you're going to learn from it. This is what I mean by the ambiguity, the contradictory nature of these predictions, and how somebody who is credulous, somebody who already believes in it, will look back and reinterpret the event as fitting their star sign or their horoscope.
So that's a long-term transit. It's going to hit different people's charts in different ways. So it's not that transit's going to be intense during the entire period, but as soon as that planet changes signs, it would be good to pay attention to what themes start to arise in your life with respect to friends and groups, just because some of those themes may have much more longer-term importance than you might expect just initially. So definitely pay attention to that. All right, I see we have a bunch of people in the live chat. Thanks everyone for joining me today. I'm actually able to follow this a little bit, and I appreciate all your comments. I may have a little here. I want to transition now into some of the more positive transits, because there's actually a lot of good ones this year, especially for those with Aries rising.
Okay, one more.
So the first one I want to focus on and pay attention to is one that's about to begin again,
because this is fun for me,
which is Jupiter is going to ingress into Aries here later in December of 2022, and it's going to be transiting through the sign of Aries for the entire first about 5 months of 2023. So Jupiter is the planet of growth and expansion and possibilities, and going through your rising sign is usually a period of growth and expansion, especially in your a personal sense and your sense of self. So you're going to find yourself being a bit more optimistic this year. You're going to find yourself potentially being a little bit more lucky this year in terms of being in the right place at the right time. Jupiter transits have this sense of just like optimism and growth and possibilities. And I think this year, especially in the first 5 months, you want to pay very close attention to any opportunities for growth, either personal and internal, but also, as we'll see later, there can also be some potential for growth even financially this year as well. Because
so yeah, you're gonna experience moments where the possibility for growth is there, either personal and internal in this vague way, or financial. So if you find $20 bill on the ground, that's because Jupiter is in Taurus for the second half of the year. Or if you find yourself focused on exercising more, or getting in a good reading schedule, and that's going to help you grow as a person, then there you go. That's Jupiter in Taurus for you.
Because the next transit that's going to take place after...
Like, who doesn't this apply to in some way, shape, or form? In a vague, ambiguous way, who doesn't this apply to in some sense?
After Jupiter departs from Aries, is that Jupiter is actually going to move into Taurus for the entire second half of the year. And the second house, or Taurus for you, is your second house, which is the place of finances, possessions, and income. So basically you're going to go from one pretty positive transit that can affect things like your sense of self, body, your character in terms of being more optimistic.
And it covers everything, your sense of self. So if you're sort of like a bookish or an introverted person, then your growth will be because you're going to want to read more. If you're sort of a fitness person, then it's your body that's going to be growing. If you're big on business and finances, then your business is going to grow. You're going to make it covers every single base in a vague and ambiguous way, so that, like I said, if you're credulous already, if you want to believe this, you can find something in this to draw a pattern from.
as well as your appearance, so that if there's anything about your appearance that you've wanted to change or trying new things that you've wanted to experiment with, this can be a good time for that with Jupiter going through in the first half of the year. We're then going to shift into a period of growth and expansion with respect to money, possessions, and finances in the second half of the year, which basically can just be a good period to attempt to grow financially. If there's new projects that you've been wanting to initiate, this can be a good time to do that business-wise. If you've thought about, it's not usually a period of like consolidation necessarily, because that's more of a Saturn transit type thing in the second house, but basically just finding areas where there's the potential for growth, seeing if you can put sort of water on those areas in terms of like planting new seeds in that area. And this will be a time in the second half of the year where you'll see those things growing much more than previous years. And in some ways, this is going to be a continuation because we've already had a number of eclipses taking place in the sign of Taurus recently, which indicates major beginnings and major endings for you financially, so that you may have already started trying some new things financially over the course of 2020.
Is it major beginnings and major endings? Wow, both. It's what, a 2-for-1 deal. It's either a major beginning or a major ending.
Two. But here, I think in 2023, you're going to find more success. You're going to see that the seeds that you planted previously are starting to grow in a way that's much more fruitful and a much more just readily accessible for you than in other times, like in 2022. All right, so Jupiter in the second, good financial transit.
Okay, I think that's enough. So yeah, it's the ambiguity of these predictions, the vagueness of them, the cover-all basis of it, that it just, if you're ready to believe this kind of thing, you will find a pattern. That's the nature of these things. Okay, that's what I say here. The fact about predictions being vague, ambiguous, and the arbitrary assignment of certain traits to planets, the fact that no rational mechanism is conceivable for why the stars would influence our personalities or events. And this to me is another big thing, the incalculably contradictory influences that these stars have on people living side by side, born simultaneously, people who die simultaneously, people who experience the same events simultaneously, who have vastly different horoscopes, different star signs. It happens all the time. There are thousands of people born every minute of the day, and to believe that just because they're born the same minute that they'll have a similar personality or a similar fate or something along those lines is absurd. It's absurd to me. And there's just no rational analysis that can be applied to astrology to make it make any sense to somebody who can think along these rational lines. You have to have a pre-existing sort of inclination to believe in this kind of thing. And that leads me to my next point here. The lack of rational analytical ability is demonstrated in believing astrology. Oh, the other thing too about simultaneous births, twins. I have twin half-sisters, and they are extremely different people. They are not they're very different people. That's as specific as I'll get on that, but they're very different people. They look very different from each other, but they were born simultaneously from the same mother and father, and they couldn't be more different. And yet, obviously, they should have the same exact star signs and horoscopes and birth signs and all the other traits or all the other qualities that astrology would say predicts your fate. And I know the believers in astrology will say something like, oh, well, it's not a deterministic thing. It sort of just subtly influences you, and it's sort of a harmony with the celestial reality, or something very vague and flowery like that. But that's exactly what I'm saying. Opens up this possibility, this ambiguity, for people to look and project into it whatever preconceptions and biases they have. And if the stars are that vague in their influence on our lives, then it might as well not influence us at all. And the main, if I were having a scientific conversation about this, I would get more into the mechanisms of it, but also the fact that there's no conceivable rational mechanism for how this would work seals the deal for me. You ask an astrologer, what is the mechanism by which this happens? They will never give you a clear, unambiguous answer, because it's not possible. So what is it that causes people to believe in this? And this is really going to tick the believers off. I'm sure this is going to irritate the believers in the crowd here, but I say one must lack a cohesive meta-theory on causality in general to hold such a contradictory belief. Adherents to astrology are often able to think rationally in one sphere of thinking, but let me bring my picture back too so you guys can see my beautiful face. But not when it comes to astrology, showing cognitive compartmentalization. And the resultant dissonance often causes adherents to react with anger, smugness, condescension, amusement, etc. when pressed with criticisms of astrology. This also often corresponds or coincides with refusal to take responsibility for personal flaws. This is a big thing I think I've noticed in people who believe in astrology. They refuse to take responsibility for personal flaws. Things like, I'm cranky, my relationships have failed, I can't meet a good partner, I'm forgetful, I'm financially screwed, etc., etc. Provides a scapegoat to allow the believer to avoid facing uncomfortable facts about themselves. If you can believe something like, my relationships have failed because I'm Taurus, or I'm whatever, or I'm so forgetful this week. Let me look at my star sign. Why am I so forgetful this week? It's because the Jupiter is going into the ascending moon of Aries and Capricorn, or something like that. Or I can't find a good partner. I can't find a good boyfriend or girlfriend. It must be because Cancer is descending into the second realm of Baldur's Gate. So and Darnassus is currently rising into the realm of Numenor. So it's not a good time for me to meet somebody. So I looked this up, and it turns out there is a connection between childhood trauma and the development of paranormal beliefs. I think that people, if they experience some kind of traumatic event in their childhood, that sort of arrests their development of rational thinking, because often when a traumatic event happens to somebody, they have to compartmentalize their minds in a way that, especially if they experience some trauma in connection to like a family member or something like that, where they trust the person, they love the person, but the person does harm to them, their ability to think rationally is short-circuited, because they have to hold contradictory ideas in their minds simultaneously. They love me, but they've done something to harm me. That's often the case, I think, in the creation of or the short-circuiting of the development of rational analysis and rational thinking faculty. So overall, that, I'm sure that's going to piss off the astrology, my armchair psychologizing of astrology, but that is a lot of what I've experienced, especially if you look at, like Philosophicat, since she is the self-appointed expert on astrology for the dissident right. If you follow some of the things that she tweets, it seems like she's constantly blaming things on star signs, saying like, this hasn't been a good week for me to be productive because something going on in my star sign. So yeah, that's that pretty much wraps it up. Let's go to the chat. I know that there's one adherent here, Ariel, who says, I am not understanding the nuances of this at all, and I'm really misconstruing it in my own assumptions. So I'm not understanding the nuances. These nuances I think that she's referring to are exactly what I've been talking about, which is these star signs, these horoscopes, these predictions have all different manners, all different varieties of potential predictions that are provided by them. And if I were to be nuanced, I should see, actually it's a subtle influence. It could go one way or the other. But that's my point. That's my point, is it's not even giving clear, unambiguous predictions. It's giving vague, flowery, generalized descriptions and predictions that somebody who wants to believe in it will find a pattern in. So let me scroll back up and see anything else that and this is also she's saying that there's a spectrum of accountability. Ariel, the resident astrology adherent, there's a spectrum of accountability. So what that means is basically it's predetermined, but it's not predetermined. It's influencing you, but you can overcome the influence. Okay, this is what Sextus Empiricus also addressed in his arguments, which is either these predictions are deterministic, either these predictions cannot be avoided, in which case there's no point in giving this prediction. If you can't avoid something, telling you in advance that it's going to happen won't change anything, and it's pointless. Or it is changeable. It is something you can avoid, and therefore the prediction itself was false. Right? So if I tell you you're going to be hit by a car next week, either that is a deterministic prediction. It's going to happen. And in that case, what can you do? Whether you were told the prediction or not, you're going to be hit by the car and it doesn't matter. Or you can change it, in which case the prediction becomes false. Because if you can change it, if I say you're going to be hit by a car next week and you can change it so that you won't be hit by a car, then my prediction wasn't true. A prediction is only true if after the fact, if you make it beforehand and it actually happens. And you can only know if a prediction is true after the fact. Ariel says, you are not willing to listen, you're dismissive and jumping to conclusions. You're not telling me how. And you're not telling me how I'm wrong. So stop misunderstanding my context. You're not giving me specific context. Give me a specific, because we just looked at Chris Bennett, right? And his predictions about the horoscope of Aries. And I talked about how these predictions are vague, how they are generalized, how they are ambiguous, and how they would apply to just about everybody in the world. So these are specific examples of predictions given by astrologers. Can you give me a prediction? An example of a prediction? GG user says, I do think there must be a reason that our ancestors never developed such a system, going back to the idea that astrology arose from anomic social conditions due to multi-ethnic states, our Northwest Euro. Ancestors being practical and homogeneous had no use for it. I did. You need to scroll all the way up. I go through this chat, see what I already said you missed. Oh my god. I'm looking. I'm looking. And this is another thing. So Ariel's arguing. He said rising matters. It doesn't, and it only represents how you come off or your first impression. So this is like a major problem with astrologers too. Is there's no systematic methodology. You ask two astrologers to give you predictions, and you will get two completely different sets of vague, ambiguous predictions. I guarantee if you take a set of astrologers and you tell them, do this person's horoscope, you will get 3 or 4, how many different astrologers you take, you will get a different number of general, vague descriptions. And if they all learned from the same master astrologer, then they'll have similar themes, but all of these similar themes are, like I just showed with Chris Bennett, all these similar themes are general and ambiguous to the point where they will apply to just about everybody. I went through, just to tell you, I sat through a number of these horoscope videos from Chris Bennett. And every single one of them, I found things where it's like, oh yeah, I guess that could kind of, in a vague, generalized way, fit my life. How could I fit, in a vague, generalized way, all of the horoscopes? Unless all of the horoscopes are constructed in a way that, through its vagueness, through its generality, through its ambiguity, apply to almost everybody. Excuse me, I have some gas tonight. Let's go. Ariel says, that's because everyone is self-taught, but some people actually follow the rules. But whose rules? Who decides the rules? If everybody's self-taught, the only way you'd know is if your personal guru, who you follow, if you're actually following their discipline. Anyway. Charlie says, would you be willing to debate an astrologer on stream? I'd talk to an astrologer. I don't think it would be much of a debate, but I'd talk to them. Another interesting facet of this whole discussion is the history of astrology, which I'm not prepared to get into today, but I'll tell you this much. A lot of modern astrology and the sort of like rebirth of astrology into the modern world was created by people who have very suspicious connections. A lot of it connects to theosophy. A lot of it connects to Freemasonry. A lot of it was promoted at, top finance industrialists, a lot of weird people were connected with the modern reemergence of astrology. And if you want my opinion on a lot of ancient astrologers, people like John Dee, people like Edward Kelly, other historical figures who practiced astrology and were employed by kings and royalty and emperors and those types of people. I make the argument on my Substack that these people were using it as a cloak for genuine, rational means of it gathering intelligence, and that these people, these political rulers who employed these astrologers, they would laugh at predictions like the ones given by Chris Bennett here, Brennan. They wanted legitimate, practicable, rational intelligence that would give them an advantage in real world scenarios like war, like in establishing their empire, in dealing with political enemies, etc. And a way for these astrologers to gather that information and then protect themselves, hide and conceal their means for gathering the information, would be to cloak it in astrology. Gromby asks, am I a Christian? No, I am not. Astrology debate would be hilarious. Please do. I'd do it for the fun of it, I suppose. I'd love to see what kinds of answers, I have a feeling I know what kinds of answers I would get to these questions from astrologers today. But yeah, I'd have a conversation with an astrologer. So, let's see, how long have I been going here? Let me see how long I've been going. Almost 2 hours. So I've said, I think, everything that I wanted to say about astrology. And I'll just chat with you guys for another few minutes if you want. Otherwise, I'm going to be getting to bed pretty soon. Ariel asks, Germ, can we connect? I only got email and Discord. Yeah, you could send me an email. I'll type it in here. John Levi. Is he of the Levite tribe? Let's look him up. Let's see what his videos look like. Oh, he does this Tartarian kind of stuff. Interesting. Yeah, I'll check him out. I'll check him out. Let me for the sake of my own fun, since you guys are still here, let's look at one more. Should we do Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Virgo, Libra, Leo? What should we do? Anyone? First person to say something, I'll do it. Ariel thinks I'm a Sagittarius. Is that what you're saying? Gemini. One Adam says Gemini. There we go. We'll do Gemini. Yeah, what do you think I am, Ariel? Sagittarius? Did D make up the wife swapping? That yeah, well. So what's your main issue with astrology? Man, I've been talking about main issues for the last hour and a half. It's ambiguous. It's vague. It applies to just about everybody. It's there's no rational mechanism for it. It is often promoted with this very emotional, if you don't believe this, you don't honor our ancestors. This is the tradition of our ancestors kind of gambit. AG says, I'm obviously a Libra. Or Men Like God says, I'm obviously a Libra. Everybody's been wrong. I am not Sagittarius. I am not Libra. Let's start this.
All right, so the first transit that I want to talk about is the Mars retro.
What's my birthday, Ariel? If your crystal ball told you my birthday, I would be very impressed.
Grade that's actually happening in Gemini in your first house of mind, body, self.
Capricorn, Scorpio, you'll get it right at some point.
And appearance. And this Mars retrograde transit is one that really dominated the second half of 2022 once Mars moved into Gemini way back in...
I was born January 5th, 1992. Now you all know.
August of 2022, but it really intensified around late October when Mars stationed retrograde in your first house. So, Mars first house transits can be kind of tricky because the first house represents both the body and the mind, and Mars represents traditionally significations like anger, conflict, strife, even war, since Mars was traditionally the planet of war. So since this is...
Someone had to get it right, Boss Chad. Someone had to get it.
It's all coming into your first house. It can sometimes indicate a period in which you can be more irritable, in which you can be more prone to starting arguments with people or becoming more aggressive or argumentative for a period of time. One of the
my social security number is 599286489.
dangers of this transits is sometimes acting impulsively, which can lead to getting into accidents or injuries or other things like that, since the first house represents the body and physical vitality, and Mars can sometimes indicate injuries or different things like that. So I know I had one Gemini friend, for example, who right around the time of Mars stationing retrograde, they got in a car accident and they totaled their car, which is a very Mars in the first house type of transit. Or another friend who, just had a bit of an injury from doing something impulsively at that time. So one of the things you might want to continue to do, since this transit really is going to continue into the early part of 2023 when Mars stations direct in Gemini around January 12th, and then Mars is not going to depart from your first house and from your rising sign until March, until late March. So the transit doesn't really end until that time period. So one of the things you want to do is just try to be a little bit more cautious. Try not to do anything impulsive that would put you in a dangerous situation. And if this is a transit that's agitating you more mentally, then just try to exercise greater restraint, or sometimes remember that you might be in a period where you're more irritable or likely to start arguments at this time.
See, this is one I've done this already a million times, but just really think about what he's saying. You're either going to suffer some kind of injury physically, or maybe you'll be a bit more irritable and you'll start arguments with people. These kinds of vague general predictions about people apply to a lot, especially if you have the idea in your mind and you look back at it. Who doesn't have a day where they start arguments with somebody? Who doesn't have a day where they stub their toe or something breaks or something happens that you can interpret as applying to this.
So see if you can hold back a little bit. On the positive side, this transit can sometimes give people, especially with night charts, a lot more energy and a lot more ability to get work done.
So not only is it, you might be injured, you might be irritable, but you might also have more energy than usual. You might be more assertive and put yourself forward. Like, what do these things have to do with each other other than just a smattering of possible things that might happen under this particular theme that apply to almost everybody?
And to be assertive and to put themselves forward and put their own needs.
Like, what kind of prediction is that? You're imagine like somebody comes to you and says, give me a prediction about what's going to happen to me. And you tell them, well, in the next few months, you might be injured, or you might be irritable, or you might have more energy than usual. What?
Forward in their life in different ways. So that can actually be quite constructive, especially if you're a person that's not usually used to putting yourself first, or you're not usually used to acting in a way that's more assertive or more dominant in different ways. This can be a good time to sort of channel some of that Mars energy, as long as you're not overdoing it. So that's one of the transits right at the very beginning of the year. Moving on to the other transit, another one that begins around March is the planet Saturn is actually going to move and end a 3-year-long transit through the sign of Aquarius, which is your 9th house of religion and education and travel. And Saturn's going to move into Pisces, which is your 10th house of career, reputation, social standing, and overall life direction. So this is going to begin a 3-year transit that's going to last all the way until 2026. So it's kind of a long transit. So Saturn transits.
Men like God says, AG, you're getting the hang of this. Yeah, maybe I'll start, you know what? Sorry, scratch everything I said, fellas. I believe in astrology now. If you want a reading, it'll cost you.
It can sometimes be a period of consolidation when it comes to the area of your chart that it's transiting through. For you, because it's your 10th house, it's primarily going to relate to your career and to your overall life direction. So you may go through a period in which you encounter a little bit more resistance than usual when it comes to some of the things that you're trying to do in terms of your career and overall life direction. And one of the things that you're going to have to decide is if some of the challenges that arise at this time, if they're meant to be the classic what doesn't kill you makes you stronger type things, so that you're meant to hit those surmountable difficulties and overcome them, and as a result of that you come out of it stronger and with a greater sense of purpose. And
I remember hearing exactly this in the previous reading for Aries. Interesting.
Meaning in terms of your overall life direction and where you're headed with life. Or alternatively, there may be some scenarios where you just run into a blockage or a wall that says that you can't proceed further in this direction with your career or your life direction.
So that kind of covers every possibility, doesn't it? You're going to run into a problem over the next 3 years. You're going to run into a problem, and either you're going to overcome that problem and become stronger from it, or you're going to realize that you can't overcome the problem and you're going to have to go a different direction. What other possibility is there?
And instead you may have to choose a different.
That's like telling somebody, so over the next couple days, somebody's going to ask you a question, and based on your star signs, you're probably going to say yes to that question, but also it's possible that you'll say no to the question.
Route or go in a different direction entirely. So
Ariel, I posted my email. It's apollothegerm@gmail.com.
For many of us, that can sometimes be very frustrating to run into like a stop sign like that, where Saturn forces you to go in a different direction. But it's one of those things where whenever Saturn closes one door, it always ends up opening another. And that may be frustrating at first, but later, sometimes years later, you look back and realized if you hadn't run into that roadblock, then you wouldn't have gone this other direction, which ended up being very fruitful and very much tied in with or closer to like your overall meaning and life purpose than the other direction was up till that point. So that transit's going to begin as soon as Saturn ingresses into Pisces in March. And then it will be good to start getting a sense for paying attention to if you have any career things that start coming up at that point, because even if they look like small little developments at that time in the second quarter of 2023, they may turn into much larger things later on over the course of the next 3 years as Saturn transits through that.
And it's always, it may, it might, it could, it's possible. These are not predictions.
That sign. All right. Other things happening. So Saturn's departing from your 9th house of religion and philosophy.
This is like the definition of hand waving. It might happen. It could happen. It's possible. It might. Looking back on it, you could reinterpret it. And if an astrologer can give me a single specific example of a prediction of something that's going to happen next week, something specific, give me look into your crystal ball and tell me something specific. Then we can test to see if it's going to be, if it's real.
Philosophy and foreign travel and education.
Tell me what stock is going to go up next week so I can get rich.
Pluto, interestingly, is actually going to ingress into that same sign, into your 9th house of religion and philosophy and belief. And it's going to do so for just a few months.
Norvin Hobbs asks, you want to do an astrology debate? Sure.
From March.
Ariel says, damn, the arrogance is real. How is that arrogant? That is what a prediction is. That is what a prediction is, a specific event that you tell will happen before the fact. Hand waving and saying you may experience this or that, this might or the opposite might happen, or something unrelated might happen, or and doing this vague, generalized, ambiguous thing is not making predictions.
23rd until June 11th.
It's called a forecast. It says right here, forecast. This is not a forecast. A forecast is, it will rain tomorrow.
11th. So
no, astrology isn't for that. Then why is he calling it a forecast? Why are they called predictions?
This is important because this is going to be a preview of a much longer term 20-year transit of Pluto going through this sector of your chart as it moves through Aquarius between now and the early 2040s, basically. So for many of you, the 9th house represents a person's beliefs.
See, for many of you,
which can indicate like philosophical.
For many of you, maybe not for all, because who knows? I need to cover all the bases.
Beliefs. It can indicate religious beliefs, and it can also indicate things like political beliefs. So for a lot of people, Pluto transits represent a major transformation. So many of you may see yourself going through some sort of fundamental transformation when it comes to.
A lot of you may, some of you might.
The concept of belief and the role that it plays in your life during the course of this transit. So since this is going to be a very long-term 20-year transit, this is probably not going to be something that happens overnight.
For many of you, you may experience a transformation over the next 20 years. Oh, whew, I can't take much more of this. It's getting too late and I'm starting to get loopy.
But for many of you, as soon as Pluto starts hitting personal planets, especially to the degree during the course of this transit, you may see
That is so funny to me. That is just so funny. over the next 20 years, many of you may experience a transformation.
Specific turning points where you go through a transformation where maybe you go into the transit sort of believing one thing or having one set of beliefs, but you come out of it on the other side having come to a place that's much different and much more foreign to what you're used to up to that point. So that doesn't necessarily have to be either a negative thing or a positive thing. Usually Pluto transits just represent a major change that's sort of fundamental in terms of your overall life and direction, and that can oftentimes be just as positive as it is negative.
And yeah, it's going to be either positive or negative. You're going to go a direction today, and it's you're either going to turn left or right. Yeah, you're going to enter an elevator this evening, and you're either going to go up or down. You're going to drive around in a car today, and you're either going to go fast or slow.
All right, so that's going to be just a little preview of that transit before Pluto retrogrades back out into Capricorn for most of the year, but I just wanted to mention it because, again, you want to pay attention if any ninth house topics come up in your life at that point, because they could end up becoming much more important in the long term, since that's just a very, very bare preview of what will be a 20-year-long transit. All right, so moving on, let's see, what do we got
Okay,
next?
this is really the last one because
moving into more positive stuff. Jupiter is going to be transiting through the sign of Aries for the first 5 months of the year, which is your 11th house of friends and groups and social movements. This is also a sector of your chart where we're going to start seeing some eclipses taking place this year, starting in the spring, especially around April and May. We're going to get a solar eclipse in the sign of Aries, which is also your 11th house of friends and groups.
Boss Chad says this guy is a beginner. This guy has written books on astrology. This guy is like the authority that Philosophicat uses. He's written multiple books on astrology. He's been doing this for years.
Groups and social movements. So what that probably means is two things. One, that you're going to begin a period of major beginnings and major endings.
Hey, good Mackie.
When it comes to friends and groups and social movements in your life during the course of this year, especially in the spring. And two, that some of these developments are actually going to be positive and are going to be opening up a period of growth and expansion in that area of your life, as opposed to a period of contraction. So
sure, dude.
Sometimes when eclipses take place, they can indicate endings, which can sometimes mean, when it's happening in the 11th house, that you have a period where some friendships kind of go through their natural life cycle and reach an ending point where for some reason certain friendships will end. But for you, I think it's going to err much more on the positive side of probably beginning some new major friendships and starting some contacts or making some contacts with people socially that are going to expand your horizons and ultimately be somewhat positive when it comes to helping to support your overall sort of life direction.
See, you're either gonna end a friendship or you're gonna make a friend.
And career plans, since the 11th house sometimes supports
not necessarily even a friend, but a contact.
The 10th house as the place of hopes and wishes. So that's going to be especially the case for those of you with day charts, because then that Jupiter transit is going to be much more positive through your 11th house of friends and groups, and it should bring some positive Jupiterian type characters into your life, either that have Jupiter very prominently placed in their chart or that have Jupiter ruling their chart, for example, by having Sagittarius rising or Pisces rising or something like that. So major beginning.
Parabot says he is shotgunning. Yep.
And some major endings and growth and expansion when it comes to friends is the highlight of that transit for the first 5 months, and that's going to take place all the way until mid-May. Then after that, Jupiter is going to ingress into Taurus for the second half of the year, and this is also a sector of your chart where you're going to start having some eclipses. So you've been having eclipses in the Taurus and Scorpio axis through most of 2022 already. So for many people, when they have eclipses taking place in the 6th and 12th house axis, the 6th and 12th house primarily relate to your physical health and your mental health. So sometimes this can be a period where you're putting greater emphasis or paying more attention to your physical or mental health than compared to other times in your life. Let me just circle that. All right. There we go. So putting more emphasis on mental and physical health are major hallmarks of a 6th and 12th house transit. So sometimes people like go to a gym and like start working on their physical health, or they start trying to eat better. But basically, either there's an event that comes up that kind of forces them to do better in terms of their health, or sometimes they just start feeling like they want to focus on health more so that they can prevent potential issues that might come up in the future.
So either an event will happen that will inspire this in you, or you'll just kind of start feeling that way, and you're gonna focus on exercising more, or eating better, or reading more, or I'm done with this. All right, that's it for tonight. This was fun though. Maybe I'll do more laughing at horoscopes again in the future, because I found that incredibly amusing. I think you guys are, a lot of you, not all, but a lot of you may have probably enjoyed this, and some of you might not have. So that's, I think, part of your star sign, is that a lot of right now the stars are telling me that either a lot of you enjoyed this, or maybe some of you didn't. And I think also my crystal ball and my palms and the tea leaves in my tea told me that it may be that some of you next time will show up to my stream. Maybe some of you won't. That's also a possibility, according to the crystal ball. But if those of you who may have enjoyed this did enjoy it, then you might put a like on the video, and hopefully, if the stars allow it, I will see you all next time. Much appreciated.